Good morning, English 2. Today, what you're going to be doing is making a reverse outline for sample students' essay entitled Fantasy and Reality, the Structure of Walter Mitty's Secret Life. So you've already had the opportunity to read over sample students' essay, which you've annotated what you've noticed. And now what you're going to be doing is thinking about what sample student does, and you're going to record that in this middle column, the main components of sample student's essay. And then you're going to reflect on how this supports the central idea or the thesis statement in the paper. So let's go back to the paper. So I have annotated this essay in two different colors. This is actually a green color. And then I have some sentence starters I noticed in purple. So I'll point those out as we go along. So in the first portion of this essay, I noticed that sample student starts off with telling us the title, the author, when it was published, it's a short story, and tells us just a little bit about Walter Mitty. So I am going to go back to my graphic organizer and I'm going to record that because that's going to be important information that I will want to use when I go to write my own paper about the short story that I read. So on your paper, it already says a brief summary of the text, which includes the name of the text, the author, and the date of publication. So now we're going to look at what else sample student does in our first paragraph. So looking back at his or her paper, you'll notice there's this sentence. Thurber shows that Walter yearns for a more exciting life by alternating descriptions of Walter's reality with Walter's fantasies of becoming a hero in stressful situations. In this sentence, a sample student connects the character with the structure. So for the first time, I know that this paper is not just a summary, but instead it's going to be an analysis of structure and character. So on your graphic organizer, you can make a note that sample student makes an analysis of character and structure. You will also note that I noticed a really nice sentence starter here. So in this case, sample student says what Thurber does. Thurber shows that Walter yearns. So that's a really great way to start the sentence. And then right here is the word by, and that's the part where sample student really starts to tell us something about the structure. So I've included this sentence starter for you when you go to write your own paper. So I have the author shows that a character needs, wants, or desires by some kind of technique. At the end of this paragraph, you'll notice that we have the thesis. Over the course of the story, Thurber's structure reveals that Walter relies on fantasy in order to escape the confines of his dull and depressing life. So this thesis tells me this paper will be about fantasy and about a dull and depressing life. So on your graphic organizer, you just identified the thesis statement. So you will write thesis statement on line number 3. You will also notice that I've included that sentence starter over the course of the text. Author's or Thurber's structure reveals something about a character. So now that we've really looked closely at the components of paragraph 1, we're ready to think about how does paragraph 1 help to support the central idea or the central message, the thesis statement of this paragraph. This paragraph actually includes the thesis statement, so it supports it in kind of a different way. Instead, this paragraph really shows that sample student truly understands the story. And also it shows that sample student will not just be summarizing the text in this essay, but instead looking at structure, the alternating descriptions, and a focus on character. So right here, I'm going to write a little summary of that thought. So I've written, by giving a brief summary of the text, sample student shows he, she fully understands the text. Also, the thesis shows he, she will be summarizing the text. Will not be summarizing, but instead engaging in high-level analysis. And you might even want to make a note, and this is going to be about structure and character. At this point, you can pause the video to write down these thoughts and then restart it when you are ready.
1, 2, 3.
So the next portion we'll be looking at is paragraph 2, which is right here. And what sample student does is she tells us what happens at the beginning of the story. So sample student starts with this sentence starter of Thurber begins his story. And then sample student starts telling us what is happening in the text. So I'm going to go back to my graphic organizer, and I'm just going to make a note that at this point, sample students begins discussing first portion of the text. And you'll notice I also included the sentence starter. Author begins his or her story by, and there's a place for you to fill in your own information about your own story. As you look through the next portion of this passage, you'll notice that this is a very high-level quote sandwich. We start with some context of a quote. Of the first line of the text is a dramatic explanation from an unnamed commander we're going through. And now we have the analysis of the exclamation jolts the readers, leading them to believe that something exciting is in progress. And then some analysis of the specific techniques that Thurber is using. In this case, present tense verbs, which heightens excitement. He also uses short exclamation points and onomatopoeia. So in this case, what we see is textual analysis. And it is in the form of a quote sandwich, which we did a lot of work with in Unit 1. Finally, at the end of the paragraph, you are noticing that we are focusing really on this intensity of the passage, which leads us really nicely back to this idea of fantasy, and that fantasy is a much more exciting life for Walter. And that really just wraps us up. It's leading us to a new paragraph. So I'm going to just make a note that this links back to the thesis. That this is exciting and fantasy. Thinking about this second section, it's really obvious that paragraph 2 really focuses on fantasy. And there's a really strong analysis of the details that Thurber uses to differentiate between fantasy and real life. And it's truly showing intensity at this point. You will be able to, in this block, make a note about how that intensity happens. This video is about to end, but what you're responsible for at this point is going through the rest of sample students' essay